At its peak, this company was worth $9 billion. Its founder was on the cover of Forbes, Fortune, and Inc. She was called the next Steve Jobs, and at 31, she was the youngest self-made female billionaire in the world. Her company's technology promised something genuinely revolutionary: hundreds of medical tests from a single drop of blood. No needles, no labs, just a finger prick and a small machine that could sit in any pharmacy in America. Investors put in nearly $1 billion. Her board included 2 former Secretaries of State, a former Secretary of Defense, and a former senator. Walgreens put the machines inside real stores, and real patients started using them to make real decisions about their health. There was just one problem, and almost everyone inside the company already knew it. The technology did not work. It had never worked. And by the time anyone outside found out, it had already given thousands of patients results they trusted with their lives. In 2003, a 19-year-old Stanford student named Elizabeth Holmes dropped out to start a company. Her idea came from something almost everyone can relate to. She hated needles. Blood testing in America was slow, expensive, and unpleasant. You went to a lab, someone drew several vials from your arm, and you waited days for results. Holmes proposed replacing all of it with a single finger prick and a machine the size of a desktop printer. That machine, which the company eventually called the Edison, would run hundreds of different tests from a few drops of blood in minutes, anywhere. If it had worked, it would have been one of the most important medical advances in a generation. It would have made testing cheaper, faster, and accessible to people who avoided it entirely. Doctors would catch disease earlier. That's the part that matters most for understanding everything that follows. The promise was so good that people wanted it to be true before they ever saw evidence that it was. Holmes understood something that most founders never figure out. Credibility is transferable. If the right people stand next to you, their reputation becomes your evidence. So she built a board unlike anything in Silicon Valley. Henry Kissinger and George Shultz, both former Secretaries of State. James Mattis, a retired 4-star general who would later become Secretary of Defense. A former senator, executives from major corporations. What that board did not include was almost anyone with deep expertise in laboratory medicine or blood diagnostics. She built the image just as deliberately. She wore a black turtleneck every day, a direct echo of Steve Jobs. She spoke in a notably low voice. She kept the company under extraordinary secrecy, describing the technology in language that sounded specific but revealed almost nothing. And it worked. In 2014, Theranos was valued at $9 billion. Holmes owned roughly half of it, which made her personally worth about $4.5 billion on paper. Forbes put her on the cover. Then came the deal that changed everything. Walgreens agreed to put Theranos wellness centers inside its stores. This is the moment the story stops being about investors and starts being about patients. So what was actually inside the machine? The Edison could only run a small number of tests, not the hundreds the company advertised, and even on those it was unreliable. A finger prick produces a tiny amount of blood, so Theranos diluted the samples to have enough volume to work with. Diluting a sample makes whatever you're measuring harder to detect accurately. To cover the gap, Theranos did something that made the whole thing collapse in on itself. For most of the tests it offered to the public, it quietly used ordinary commercial blood analyzers made by other companies, the same machines it claimed to be replacing. Some had been modified to accept smaller samples, which introduced its own accuracy problems. The revolutionary device in the wellness center was, for most tests, a box. Inside Theranos, employees were divided into teams that were not allowed to talk to each other about their work. Engineers who built the hardware did not necessarily know what the chemistry teams were finding. New hires signed aggressive confidentiality agreements. People who raised concerns internally were often pushed out. But 2 young employees did not let it go. Erica Chung, a recent Berkeley graduate working in the lab, watched quality control tests fail repeatedly on the Edison devices, and then watched the company run patient samples on them anyway. Tyler Schultz, another young employee, reached the same conclusion. Tyler's situation was extraordinary because his grandfather was George Shultz, the former Secretary of State sitting on Theranos' board. Tyler took his concerns to his own grandfather. His grandfather did not believe him. What followed was months of legal pressure from Theranos' lawyers, a family divided against itself, and enormous personal cost for both young employees, for telling the truth about a machine that was giving real people the wrong answers about their blood. In 2015, a Wall Street Journal reporter named John Carreyrou started investigating. He had sources inside the company, including Tyler Schultz and Erica Chung, and what they described did not match anything Theranos said in public. Theranos' response was not to open the labs and prove the technology worked. It was to hire one of the most feared litigators in the country and go after the newspaper, the sources, and anyone connected to them. In October 2015, the Wall Street Journal published anyway. The article laid out that Theranos was running the vast majority of its tests on commercial machines, not its own, and that the accuracy of its proprietary device was in serious question. Theranos denied everything, but once regulators started looking, the story could not be argued away. Federal inspectors examined the company's California lab and found conditions that posed immediate jeopardy to patient health. Theranos was eventually forced to void or correct tens of thousands of blood test results that had already gone out to patients and their doctors. After that, everything came apart quickly. Walgreens ended the partnership and closed the wellness centers. Federal regulators banned Holmes from owning or operating a clinical laboratory for 2 years. Investors who had put in hundreds of millions watched the valuation go to nothing. Partners sued. In 2018, Theranos dissolved entirely. A company once valued at $9 billion ended with essentially nothing left, and the machine that was supposed to change medicine had never been able to do what was promised on the day it was first sold. In January 2022, after a trial that lasted months, a jury reached a verdict, and the details of that verdict are more interesting than most people realize. Holmes was convicted on 4 counts, 3 of wire fraud and 1 of conspiracy to commit wire fraud. Every one of those counts related to defrauding investors. On the charges relating to patients, the jury did not convict her. That distinction matters, and it says something uncomfortable about how the law works here. The clearest, most provable harm was to people who put in money, not to people who put in blood. In November 2022, she was sentenced to more than 11 years in federal prison and ordered to pay $452 million in restitution. Ramesh Balwani, known as Sonny, Theranos' former president and Holmes' former partner, was tried separately, convicted on all 12 counts against him, and sentenced to nearly 13 years. Holmes reported to a federal prison camp in Texas in May 2023. Her appeals have been rejected. Her sentence has since been reduced more than once for good conduct and revised sentencing guidelines, and she is currently projected for release sometime around the early 2030s. Holmes has never accepted the verdict. Her position, repeated publicly since her conviction, is that Theranos failed, but that failure is not the same thing as fraud. It's worth taking that argument seriously for a moment, because it's the argument at the center of the entire case. Startups fail constantly. Founders overpromise constantly. Silicon Valley runs on a culture of announcing the future before it exists, and most of the time, nobody goes to prison for it. What made Theranos different was not that the technology was late. It was that the company told patients the tests were accurate while running them on machines it knew were producing unreliable results, and then worked to silence the people inside who said so. That's the line. Not building something that doesn't work yet, but selling it to people making medical decisions and fighting the people who tried to warn them. Here's what makes Theranos different from a story about a machine that didn't work. The board had 2 former Secretaries of State on it. The investors were sophisticated. The retail partner was one of the largest pharmacy chains in America. Every single one of them had the resources to demand proof and the standing to insist on it. Almost none of them did, because the promise was too good, and asking for evidence would have meant risking being the person who was wrong about the future. The 2 people who did ask hard questions were in their 20s, earning entry-level salaries, with no power and everything to lose. That's usually how it goes. And it's worth remembering the next time something sounds too good to check. If you want more true stories behind the biggest money moments in history, subscribe. There's more where this came from.